Ladies and gentlemen, the life you are living today may be nothing more than the echo of the words of you have been whispering to yourself for years. Change the voice within you, and you may begin changing your entire world. There is a voice inside you that never truly becomes silent. From the moment you wake in the morning until your head rests upon the pillow at night, it continues speaking. Sometimes softly, sometimes harshly, sometimes with fear, sometimes with hope. And most people never stop long enough to realize that this hidden conversation is shaping the entire course of their lives. A man may stand before the world smiling, yet inwardly repeat words of failure all day long. A woman may pray for happiness, while secretly telling herself she is not worthy of it. People wonder why life feels heavy, why opportunities disappear, why confidence fades, yet they continue speaking defeat over themselves in quiet moments no one else can hear. The outer world often becomes a reflection of the inner speech repeated day after day. But the opposite is also true. When a person begins speaking differently within, something unusual begins to happen. Fear weakens, strength returns. New doors appear where none seemed to exist before. The mind slowly accepts a new image of life, and the heart begins moving toward it naturally. This change does not begin outside. It begins in the unseen chamber of thought. Your inner dialogue is not idle imagination. It is instruction, it is direction, it is creation in hidden form. Tonight, you may begin changing your life simply by changing the way you speak to yourself. And if these words speak to your spirit, remain until the end, because the conversation you hold within may become the very thing that transforms everything around you. There is a conversation taking place within you every hour of the day, and whether you realize it or not, that conversation is slowly becoming your life. Long before the outer world changes, the inner world accepts an idea first. A man who continually whispers within himself, "I shall never succeed," walks through life carrying invisible chains. Another man, though surrounded by difficulty, quietly says within, "Something good is preparing itself for me," and unknowingly begins moving toward a different destiny. The mind follows the feeling of the words repeated within it. Most people believe life is happening to them from the outside, yet much of what appears outwardly first lived secretly in thought. The inner speech of a person influences how they walk, how they respond to disappointment, how they meet opportunity, and even what they believe they deserve. If the inward voice is filled with fear, the body carries tension. If the inward voice is filled with defeat, the eyes stop looking for possibility. But when the inward voice begins speaking with confidence, expectation, and quiet faith, something remarkable begins changing in the spirit of a person. They start behaving differently without force. They begin expecting doors to open. The mind slowly rearranges itself around the words it hears most often. This is why one must become careful with inward conversations held in lonely moments. The world may never hear them, yet the deeper mind listens closely to every sentence. To repeatedly declare weakness is to prepare the soul for limitation. To continually rehearse failure is to build an image of failure within consciousness itself. And whatever is deeply impressed upon consciousness has a strange way of expressing itself outwardly in time. A person may pray for peace while inwardly speaking worry all day long. One may desire abundance, yet constantly repeat thoughts of lack and defeat within the heart. Such divided thinking creates confusion in the mind. The inner world must agree with the life one hopes to experience. Yet here lies the danger few recognize. Many people have spoken against themselves for so many years that destructive thoughts now feel natural to them. They no longer notice the quiet phrases of fear repeating within their minds day after day. And without realizing it, they begin programming themselves for struggle before life has even given its answer. Most people do not understand that the human mind accepts repeated inner speech as instruction. Whatever is spoken inwardly with feeling, especially over long periods of time, slowly sinks beneath the surface of awareness and begins operating as law within a person's life. This is why so many lives surrounded by limitation, without ever realizing they themselves have been quietly feeding the roots of it for years. A man says, "Nothing ever works for me," after a few disappointments, and though he speaks carelessly, the mind receives the statement as truth. Soon he expects failure before taking action. He hesitates where confidence is needed. He withdraws from opportunity because inwardly he has already accepted defeat. Another person constantly says, "I am not worthy," and though doors may open before them, they somehow find ways to reject happiness, success, or love, because the inner image they carry does not agree with receiving such things. The outer life bends itself around the inward assumption held most consistently. This silent programming often begins early. A child repeatedly criticized may grow into an adult who continues the same harsh conversation inwardly, long after the voices of others are gone. The world no longer condemns them, yet they continue condemning themselves. They rehearse old fears daily. They repeat memories of failure. They imagine rejection before conversation even begins. And because the mind cannot long separate imagination from reality, the body responds as though these fearful ideas are truly happening. Tension grows. Confidence weakens. Hope becomes distant. What makes this dangerous is that these thoughts become so familiar people mistake them for truth. They no longer question the voice within. The inward conversation becomes automatic, and the person moves through life under the influence of thoughts they did not consciously choose. In this way, many unknowingly prepare themselves for sorrow while praying for joy at the very same time. Yet no prison is more difficult to escape than the one a person cannot see. Before transformation can occur, one must first awaken to the hidden patterns moving silently through the mind. For the moment a person begins observing their thoughts, instead of blindly obeying them, the old spell begins to weaken. And that awakening changes everything. The moment a person becomes aware of their inner conversation, they stand at the doorway of transformation. Before that moment, most thoughts move unnoticed, like currents beneath dark water, carrying the whole course of life in hidden directions. People often believe they are consciously choosing their reactions, yet much of their thinking has become habit-formed through years of repetition. Fear speaks automatically. Doubt appears instantly. Discouragement rises before hope even has the chance to answer. And because these thoughts arrive so quickly and so often, many accept them as part of their nature, rather than patterns that can be changed. But something remarkable happens when a man pauses long enough to observe his own mind. He begins hearing the words he has been speaking inwardly for years. He notices how often he expects disappointment before events even unfold. He sees how quickly he condemns himself after mistakes. He becomes aware of silent assumptions that have guided his behavior without permission. This awareness alone begins weakening the old pattern, because what is clearly seen can no longer rule in complete darkness. Many spend their entire lives reacting to thoughts, without ever questioning whether those thoughts deserve belief. A fearful idea enters the mind, and immediately the body obeys it. Anxiety follows. Discouragement follows. The spirit bends beneath it. Yet not every thought deserves agreement. A passing fear is not prophecy. A memory of failure is not destiny. A moment of doubt is not the truth of who a person truly is. Awareness teaches a person to separate themselves from the voice of fear long enough to choose differently. This is where real change quietly begins. Not in force, not in struggle, but in observation. The mind becomes calmer when one learns to watch thoughts instead of becoming every thought that appears. A man may suddenly catch himself saying inwardly, "I shall never succeed," and instead of surrendering to it as he once did, he pauses. In that pause lies power. In that pause lies choice. The old pattern no longer moves unquestioned. Yet awareness alone is not enough if the inner voice continues speaking harshly afterward. For many awaken to their negative thinking only to attack themselves even more for having it. And unless the inward conversation changes from condemnation to encouragement, the mind remains trapped in another form of suffering, quietly starving for kindness it has not heard in many years. There are people who move through life that carrying a voice within them that never rests from accusation. No matter how hard they try, no matter how much they accomplish, the inward conversation remains severe. One mistake becomes proof of failure. One delay becomes proof that nothing shall ever improve. They speak to themselves with a hardness they would never dare use upon another human soul. And after many years of such thinking, the spirit grows tired beneath the weight of its own inner punishment. The mind was never meant to flourish under continual condemnation. Whatever is repeated inwardly, with emotion slowly becomes accepted as identity. If a person constantly says, "I am weak," the mind begins organizing life around weakness. If one continually repeats, "I ruin everything," the heart loses courage before action even begins. In this way, harsh self-talk quietly drains vitality from a person day after day. The tragedy is that many believe this criticism is helping them improve, when in truth it is only deepening fear and discouragement within the subconscious mind. A different inner atmosphere must be created if transformation is to occur. The inward voice must become calm, patient, and strengthening. This does not mean ignoring faults or pretending difficulties do not exist. It means refusing to define oneself by failure. A person may stumble and still say inwardly, "I am learning." One may experience delay and still quietly declare, "My life is moving in a better direction." Such words begin changing the emotional condition of the mind. And once the emotional condition changes, behavior slowly follows. Supportive thinking creates room for growth. A man encouraged inwardly rises again after disappointment more easily than one who condemns himself endlessly. Compassion toward oneself softens fear and restores confidence. The nervous spirit becomes steadier. The mind becomes more willing to attempt new things. What was once impossible begins appearing reachable, because the inward atmosphere no longer suffocates possibility before it can grow. Most do not realize that the words spoken within become emotional instruction to the deeper mind. The subconscious listens care to tone as much as language. Gentle confidence impresses it differently than fear and shame. Therefore, one must become mindful not only of what is said inwardly, but how it is said. And often, the smallest change in language becomes the beginning of an entirely new mental world. A slight shift in phrasing, a softer sentence repeated daily, may seem insignificant at first, yet hidden within those small words lies the power to either imprison the mind further or quietly open the door to freedom. Most people search for enormous changes while overlooking the quiet power hidden within ordinary words. Yet the mind is shaped little by little through repeated language spoken every day. A single sentence, if repeated often enough with feeling, may become stronger than years of outward circumstance. The words a person chooses inwardly either close the mind or open it. They either strengthen possibility or feed limitation. And many lives remain unchanged simply because the language within them never changes. Consider how different the spirit feels when a man says, "I cannot do this," compared to when he says, "I am learning how to do this." The first statement ends movement immediately. The mind hears finality. It accepts defeat before effort even begins. But the second statement leaves the door open. It permits growth. It allows the imagination to continue working toward possibility instead of surrendering to failure. Though the difference appears small outwardly, inwardly it changes the emotional atmosphere of the entire mind. The subconscious responds not only to dramatic declarations, but to the common phrases repeated throughout ordinary hours. Nothing ever works for me. I always fail. People never value me. Such statements slowly become accepted assumptions. The mind begins searching for evidence to support them, and before long the outer world seems to mirror the inward belief. But when language shifts, even gently, the inner condition begins shifting also. Good things are beginning for me. I am becoming stronger. My life is improving day by day. These words, spoken consistently and calmly, begin planting new impressions beneath the surface of consciousness. Many abandon this practice too quickly, because the outer world does not change overnight. Yet the deepest transformations often happen invisibly at first. A person suddenly notices they react more calmly than before. Fear weakens slightly. Confidence rises quietly. The inner world softens before the outer world rearranges itself. Small language changes, repeated faithfully, become new belief, and belief eventually shapes conduct, expectation, and direction in life. The mind moves toward the picture most consistently held within it. Therefore, one must speak carefully concerning themselves, for every inward phrase is helping construct an identity. A person who continually speaks as weak remains bound to weakness, but one who begins speaking from growth, peace, confidence, and possibility slowly awakens those very qualities within. And there comes a moment when these changes in language are no longer merely hopeful phrases. They begin forming a new self-image entirely. For eventually, a person must do more than speak better words. They must begin inwardly becoming the very person they long to be. One of the greatest mistakes people make is waiting for the outer world to change before changing themselves inwardly. They wait for success before feeling confident. They wait for love before feeling worthy. They wait for peace before allowing themselves to think peacefully. Yet the inner state must come first, for the outer life often follows the image held within consciousness. A person does not rise merely by wishing for a different future. They rise by inwardly identifying with a new version of themselves, long before the world fully reflects it. The mind is always moving in the direction of the identity a person accepts as true. If one continually speaks and thinks as a fearful person, fear becomes natural. If one constantly imagines themselves rejected, overlooked, or defeated, the whole manner of living begins conforming to that belief. The body carries the mood of it. Decisions arise from it. Expectations form around it. In time, life itself seems to echo the inward assumption repeatedly entertained. But when a person begins speaking from the state they desire, instead of from present limitation, something quietly shifts within. A man who inwardly says, "I am becoming strong," begins standing differently even before evidence appears. One who declares calmly, "I am worthy of good things," gradually stops accepting treatment beneath their value. A person who thinks from peace instead of panic no longer reacts to every difficulty as though disaster is certain. The future self must first become alive within the imagination before it can fully appear in the outer world. This does not mean pretending outwardly while inwardly remaining filled with doubt. The deeper work happens in feeling. One must begin entering the emotional atmosphere of the life they seek, to think from abundance instead of lack, to feel gratitude before visible proof arrives, to inwardly occupy the state of the person they wish to become. For whatever state is consistently occupied within the mind eventually impresses itself upon behavior and circumstance. Many people continue speaking from old identities because they remain emotionally attached to former disappointments. They say, "This is simply who I am," without realizing identity itself can be reshaped through repeated inner assumption. No condition is permanent when consciousness changes. The old self weakens the moment a new self is consistently entertained with faith and persistence. Yet words alone are not enough if they are spoken without feeling. The deeper mind responds most powerfully when emotion joins thought. A single moment of sincere gratitude or genuine confidence can impress the subconscious more deeply than endless empty repetition. And this is where many unknowingly either strengthen or weaken the new life they are trying to create. The mind does not change deeply through empty words alone. A person may repeat hopeful phrases throughout the day, yet if the heart remains filled with fear, doubt, and heaviness, the deeper mind continues responding more strongly to the feeling than to the language itself. Emotion is what gives life to thought. Feeling is what impresses the subconscious most powerfully. This is why two people may speak the same words, yet only one experiences true inward transformation. One speaks mechanically, while the other speaks with quiet conviction and emotional acceptance. When gratitude enters the mind, something within begins softening. Fear loosens its grip. The spirit becomes more receptive to hope. A thankful person no longer lives entirely in the atmosphere of lack because gratitude shifts attention toward fullness instead of emptiness. Even before outward circumstances fully change, gratitude prepares the inner condition for change to occur. A person who can quietly feel thankful for peace before seeing complete peace, or grateful for abundance before visible proof arrives, begins aligning inwardly with the very state they desire to experience. This feeling need not be dramatic. It is often gentle and calm, a quiet certainty, a steady sense that good things are possible. Many believe they must force emotion, but the deeper will happen naturally when one begins dwelling upon thoughts that inspire relief, hope, confidence, or appreciation. The mind gradually accepts these emotional states as familiar, and over time they become part of one's identity. The nervous spirit relaxes. Reactions change. One begins expecting life to move differently. The imagination also grows stronger through feeling. When a person inwardly sees themselves healthy, loved, successful, or peaceful, while emotionally entering the reality of that condition, the subconscious receives a much deeper impression than through words spoken without belief. The feeling becomes like a seed planted beneath the surface of the mind. And though unseen at first, seeds planted consistently, with emotion eventually bear fruit in conduct, attitude, and experience. Many fail because they continue returning emotionally to fear after moments of hope. They speak positive words briefly, then spend the remainder of the day dwelling in worry, frustration, and disappointment. The mind ultimately follows the emotional state, occupied most consistently. Therefore, one must guard not only thoughts, but feelings also. Gratitude, confidence, peace, and quiet expectancy must be revisited often until they begin feeling natural. Yet even this process requires patience, for the mind does not always surrender old patterns immediately. There will be moments when fear returns, when doubt whispers again, when old emotions attempt to reclaim their former place. And in those moments, the true secret is not perfection, but the willingness to return again and again to the new state until the mind itself is slowly rewired by consistency. Many people begin changing their inner speech with excitement, yet abandon the practice when life does not transform immediately before their eyes. They speak hopeful words for a few days, perhaps a few weeks, but when old fears return or outward conditions remain unchanged, discouragement enters the mind once again. What they do not understand is that the deeper mind is shaped through repetition. The thoughts entertained consistently become stronger than the thoughts visited occasionally. Lasting transformation is not formed in one emotional moment, but through faithful return to a new way of thinking day after day. The mind is much like a path walked repeatedly through a field. The old thoughts feel natural, because they have been traveled thousands of times. Fear has become familiar. Worry has become practiced. Self-criticism has become automatic through years of repetition. Therefore, when a person begins choosing new thoughts, the old patterns do not disappear at once. At times, the former voice returns strongly, attempting to pull the mind back into its previous condition. Yet this does not mean failure is taking place. It simply means the old habit is losing its hold slowly rather than instantly. A person must learn not to become discouraged by temporary setbacks. One fearful day does not erase weeks of progress. One moment of doubt does not destroy the new assumptions being planted within consciousness. The important thing is returning again, returning to awareness, returning to supportive thinking, returning to the feeling of peace, confidence, gratitude, and possibility, even after the mind wanders elsewhere. Every return strengthens the new direction. In time, something remarkable begins happening quietly beneath the surface. Thoughts that once required effort begin appearing naturally. Reactions soften. Confidence grows without force. Situations that once created panic no longer carry the same power. The inward atmosphere changes little by little until eventually the person realizes they are no longer thinking as the old version of themselves. The new state has become familiar. What was once practiced intentionally has become part of identity itself. This is why persistence matters more than perfection. The mind changes through gentle consistency, not through harsh struggle. A person who faithfully guards their inner conversation over time begins reshaping their entire emotional world. And as the inner world changes, the outer life slowly begins reflecting it in ways both small and profound. For in the end, a person becomes what they consistently agree with inwardly. The voice repeated most often within the soul eventually becomes the direction of one's life. And when the inner conversation finally changes completely, the whole course of a person's future may begin changing with it. One day, a person awakens to discover that the life they now live was quietly formed by the conversations repeated within themselves for years. Every fearful thought accepted without question, every hopeful word repeated with belief, every silent assumption carried through ordinary days. The inner voice was shaping the path all along. The beautiful truth is this: the same mind that learned fear may also learn peace. The same heart that repeated limitation may begin speaking freedom. No man is required to remain chained to old thoughts forever. At any moment, a new inner conversation may begin. You need not wait for the world to approve of you before speaking kindly to yourself. You need not wait for success before believing better things about your future. Begin now. Speak calmly within yourself. Speak with faith instead of dread. Speak with patience instead of condemnation. Speak as though life is opening before you rather than closing against you. For the mind listens carefully to the words repeated most often. And perhaps the greatest change a person can make is not found in wealth, appearance, or circumstance, but in learning to become a safe and hopeful place within their own thoughts. The moment your inner speech changes, your direction in life begins changing also. So tonight, listen carefully to the voice within you, because it may already be creating the life you shall soon live, the very state they desire to experience. This feeling need not be dramatic. It is often gentle and calm, a quiet certainty, a steady sense that good things are possible. Many believe they must force emotion, but the deeper happens naturally when one begins dwelling upon thoughts that inspire relief, hope, confidence, or appreciation. The mind gradually accepts these emotional states as familiar, and over time they become part of one's identity. The nervous spirit relaxes. Reactions change. One begins expecting life to move differently. The imagination also grows stronger through feeling. When a person inwardly sees themselves healthy, loved, successful, or peaceful, while emotionally entering the reality of that condition, the subconscious receives a much deeper impression than through words spoken without belief. The feeling becomes like a seed planted beneath the surface of the mind. And though unseen at first, seeds planted consistently with emotion eventually bear fruit in conduct, attitude, and experience. Many fail because they continue returning emotionally to fear after moments of hope. They speak positive words briefly, then spend the remainder of the day dwelling in worry, frustration, and disappointment. The mind ultimately follows the emotional state, occupied most consistently. Therefore, one must guard not only thoughts, but feelings also. Gratitude, confidence, peace, and quiet expectancy must be revisited often until they begin feeling natural. Yet even this process requires patience, for the mind does not always surrender old patterns immediately. There will be moments when fear returns, when doubt whispers again, when old emotions attempt to reclaim their